you can actually only see that you can only see in the physical reality. And then in 2018 or so, during my BA studies in Berlin, where I also met Robert Meeder, was when I started using digital technologies. Not because digital fashion was a thing yet, it really wasn't, but only because I wanted to introduce new tools to my workflow and make it um, more up to date. And I found that the ways we create clothes are very old-fashioned sometimes, and they're very romantic and based on things that like based on workflows from the last century. So I just learned a lot of tools, and a lot of it was self-taught, and slowly introduced those digital techniques. Um, and then with COVID happening and this whole new genre of digital art, new era of digital fashion. So that was um, it, it was really exciting around like 2021, and now has almost become kind of a more established new field. So I usually spend my time between those two worlds, and I create hybrid collections. Um, I've just released a collection in December during London Fashion Week, which was my second mixed reality collection. And again, again, I don't just work with one technology and stick to it, and it's not like I um, found my way of making clothes, and now I just repeat it over and over again. It's actually very dynamic, so I usually try to incorporate a new technology with every project that I do. And right now, um, AI is the field where the most exciting stuff is happening, and it's basically the new close 3D, if you will, and like the new 3D. So for this project, I custom trained an AI model that knew my work and knew my style, and this became my design team, and I worked with it to design this new collection. And I'm just saying it because um, with digital fashion, I feel like you have to be really dynamic, and you have to be humble enough to always say that you don't like, you, your knowledge becomes outdated within new tools, and keep looking at all the new software updates, and keep looking at new technological innovations. If you like, I can show a few visuals from this last collection just because it's a visual medium.
Sure. Could I ask everyone just to mute themselves, or if the host could set an automatic mute on those new people that come in. But Taskin, back to you, sorry.
Thank you. I will just share my screen with you guys. Oh, I think I need to be the host to do that. Can someone give me the rights to share my screen?
Yes, 1 second, 1 second.
So Taskin, whilst you get the host, maybe you can give some commentary to where you see the gaps from a gaming perspective when gamers or game developers try to create clothing in the gaming world, and where do you see that going?
Yeah. So I've worked on a couple of different projects with different industry partners, and they reach from like Samsung, so that was for their new mobile phone, that was for a filter, to car brands that need digital fashion assets um, for their presentations, to, of course, fashion brands and magazines, but very few gaming collaborations. And my perception right now is that gaming is always a few steps ahead in terms of using technology, a few steps ahead of the designers, the fashion designers. So they got amazing, skilled pe people that can create and rig and design clothes and skins for games that are very, very real-time friendly and that are like technically just perfect. And so I think they don't need someone like me for the technical implementation because like they're definitely skilled enough to do that. Um, but of course, there's room for a collaboration in terms of design. So they could ask a designer to come develop looks for them, especially when you have a signature style that feels relevant, or when there is a collaboration with a larger um, fashion house like Louis Vuitton did a few of these collaborations. Um, so that brings something to the game. Then right now you have Lady Gaga for Fortnite. So she's not a fashion brand, but a fashion icon. So the potential for collaboration there is basically bringing the cultural relevance. Um, and I think up to the point where we are technically skilled enough, they probably don't need us for like rigging and digitally making those clothes. And I also think that if it's culturally not relevant enough, then they will most likely continue to just use AI to design something very fast, a very quick turnover, rather than spending a few grand extra on having an external designer to design a few looks. Because usually, if fashion is not in the focus, they will. That's my experience is that they will just create something fitting, but not too overpowering.
Perfect, perfect. I think, do you have access now to show your work?
Let me try again.
I will give access.
Does this work now? So can you see this my screen? Okay, it's not working, is it?
No, I can't see anything.
No, we don't see. We've given the access.
Okay. Okay, so is it working now? Okay, perfect. So the first the first bit is kind of is a video. It's just a very like it's an overview of a lot of different bits from the process for the last collection. So before I show you this the final product, I just wanted to give you um, um, a little overview. So the AI that I worked with, and I worked with pictures of myself in the beginning. It's a lot about texture because I feel like text is what's lacking a lot in digital fashion, where from the acid bleaching, the bits from the haute couture that I mentioned earlier, where it's a lot about the pleats and the really the materiality. And as you can see, that it's really a reflection of the hybrid process, going back and forth between creating in physical draping, but also cloth simulations and translating all of these textures into the digital. And then the outcome was this collection that I named The Last Dance. And it consists of 7 looks, which you can see here, and they all exist both physically and digitally. And my approach is usually it's very much rooted in like how fashion designers make collections. So and I try to create different categories of clothing. So I will not just make like this, or I would also have this too, but it's really based on garments we wear, like this overall, which I'm wearing like a different version of today, leather jackets, hoodies, draped blouses, vests, and all that. And an essential part of the whole work is also then the presentation. So I create these digital editorials as well. So I think the clothing is just as important as the presentation of the clothing. And here you can see again kind of the physical versus digital. And these are some snapshots of the presentation at London Fashion Week two weeks ago or so, where we had these huge screens, and then in the screens we put mannequins with the looks. So especially for presentations, it's always a huge question of how to do it, how to combine those two different elements, because usually fashion shows are runways. They focus on the physical, but when you have both, then you always have to reconsider ways of presenting, and yeah, ideally find innovative ways to do so. And then the last few slides are just very, so usually I don't show this in this way. So this is kind of just for you to see a little bit of the actual making, where I work a lot with Close 3D. Close 3D is almost the same as Marvelous Designer. And I work with that. I drape. As you see, I scribble in it. I develop it also as a physical fabric. The middle one is a scan of the actual pleated fabric, so that was digitally printed and pleated. And then on the right, the finished skirt. And then I briefly mentioned texture being really important. I worked with dried flowers, especially with this dried amaranthus, and then there was a whole bunch of development, in the recreation of these textures. So the difficulty being, okay, how can you create this in digital, especially with the movement of it? So also without it being too much manual work, because I think it's really important to always work as kind of as smart as possible. And in Blender, which I use a lot. So Blender is my go-to program for anything that's not cloth simulation. I work a lot with geometry nodes, and these geometry nodes become a procedural way of those dried flowers, as you can see on the left. So basically, that's me trying to do as little manual work as possible and just finding one setup where I can tweak a few settings and then create those assets and put it on different garments. And then the last example is this jacket here. And again, the physical one in the middle, it's a laser cut polyester taffeta. It's polyester because with the laser cut, it melts the edges, so then becomes it keeps its shape. And it was very difficult to then create the same effect in the digital, because right now Close 3D doesn't really support this kind of texture, so it doesn't really support doing the shape. So you could cut out a circle, for example, but you can cut out like 3/4 of a circle and then just like have that have the same effect like the petals that you can see on this jacket. So basically what we had to do was we had to make the scale different. So that was the biggest the biggest difference. We had to cut out a whole shape and reattach part of the petal to the jacket. So actually every petal is sewn onto the jacket, making it quite quite an arduous technique. So compared to the Mirantis, there was no way to make it very, very efficient. So sometimes software also doesn't allow like a very, very quick and like smart way of doing things, and it's still almost like like physical couture where I have to embellish and do every bit by hand and do the same movement for hours and hours until you find a way of doing things. Yeah, but
Taskin, can I ask a question? Because I mean, from the fashion world perspective, I mean, there would be a lot of questions in terms of, you know, what is really then couture if your directive is coming from, you know, AI or if it's 3D. What's been the response from both worlds? So what has been the response from the fashion world to your process as well as the gaming, more techie world?
Mr. Taskin, can you hear us?
Sorry, I think there was a stall. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Robert. But
Okay.
I think Taskin's mic is out.
No, I think there was a stall maybe on the server side, of course. We'll give him a few moments. Maybe he fell off. While Taskin is trying to come back in again, you can hear me perfectly fine, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so maybe I will say maybe from the fashion world, at least from the teaching side, a lot of the students were using Flow 3D as a key program now that everyone's trying to use Flow. And the problem that most fashion designs use, or most fashion designers have when using these technical programs, is the output. So you might be able to design something in Flow or 3D and it looks quite interesting. But when you output that into actual patterns to create garments, there's always issues with the grading, there's always issue with the fit, there's always also issues with movement. So how the body moves in a 3D world and how the joints move is very, how do you say, like unrealistic. There's a possibility of how the body moves, right? But then there's a reality of how the body moves. So That's one big aspect we see, and that you can only really resolve when you actually create the garment or when you extract kind of the data or when you create the patterns from it. And this is where the discussion between the maker being the physical maker and the maker, the digital maker, is very key. So, I'd always challenge a lot of students and yourselves when you are creating skins to look like clothes, try and output it like real garments. Try and actually have someone create it as a fashion garment and have that discussion with them, because they will tell you precisely a certain seam of how you cut or how you shape the garment doesn't fit on how the actual body moves underneath. Number one. Number two, texturization, as Taskin was telling us, is huge, because a lot of the times the go-to of texture for game design is very flat. So it might be a latex in the real world, or might be a leather, or might be something shiny. So avoid using what everyone else uses in terms of textures, or invest in creating the digital textures that you would like to see or that you don't see so often. Why is this important? If within the gaming world we all use kind of these very metallic, shiny, flat textiles, when you output that, that's where you start getting this cosplay, fantasy looking type garments that aren't garments that we as humans want to wear every day. I mean, if you look at yourselves right now, most of you are wearing cotton, right? Cotton, linen, natural-based garments. So how does that work in the fashion world? It's not as maybe appealing, but there's ways in what we call in the fashion world to style it and to layer it. So even though the undergarment might be a cotton, how do you build on cotton to create different shapes and forms that might work as individual pieces or might work as a collection of pieces that come together? Yeah. Is Taskin with us, or is he still?
Yes, I'm not sure what happened.
Okay.
But I just flew out of the meeting for a sec.
No problem.
And right.
So
Yeah, cool.
the question I asked, I just was talking to everyone about this. One of the key things that we see between texturization as being an area of development that's needed from the gaming side, and also fit and form of the body's real mobility, and that can only be addressed when you actually prototype between both the digital and the physical. But I asked you a question on precisely what has been the response from gaming and the fashion world to your collection so far.
Right. So when it comes to the collection that I just launched now, from a gaming perspective, it is I think a nightmare, because it is not real-time friendly at all. And that was not my approach. So I think one outcome, or one is you design differently depending on what you want to do with it. So if you only want to do stills, you can go crazy on the size of your project and your scene, and you can do very intricate textures, and you can play with very dense formulations. But then when you want, so that is something that my fashion audience loves. Intricate, the textures are so high res, you can see the grime in it, like, because that's very much what my style is about the swampy and grimy look. But then if I send this to someone who works with Unreal Engine to rig it and make it real-time friendly for a game, they would say, please, like, do it one more time and like reduce everything. Just instead of actually cutting out those like petals, you have to make that into like a flat um, texture. Maybe play with the up cutouts, and therefore, um, what I also tend not to do is I don't develop for games, because it doesn't really fit my style of how like high fidelity and textures. And so therefore not every concept and not every style is suitable for all usages. And my my approach is also to work with patterns that are tested in the physical. So I'd rather do these renders and then have the possibility to also all the seam lines match. But I also know a lot of people who only work for the digital, and for them it doesn't matter if the pattern is perfect or not. They would not invest an extra day or so in correcting the shape of the sleeve arch just to make it like technically perfect.
Taskin, do you think there's then a possibility, because for the rest of our audience, within the fashion world, there are levels of fashion garments. So you might have your everyday clothing, which we call ready to wear, and then you might have more formal clothing, and then you have the highest level of clothing, which is called haute couture, which is from Paris, very limited, very high craft, very impractical, yet very expensive. Do you think that in this kind of digital gaming world that there could be these new classifications then of maybe you can have a kind of a show-off skin that's only maybe something you wear on your profile, but there's a gaming version of it that, you know, when you need to run fast and kill your enemies, that there's another skin you can apply, but both interplaying with each other?
So we kind of developed in the NFT world was this categorization into different like quantities. So they kind of imitated this these categories that we have in the traditional rare, like ultra rare, and legendary items, for example, for super expensive. And then the kind of the common category, you had maybe an edition of 1000, which was then very like much cheaper. So this is how they kind of imitate within one platform. It's always the same technical specifications. If you work for the central land, it will always say the textures can be okay, but then even if you wanted to create a legendary piece, you cannot go beyond. You cannot go beyond 500,000 polygons for your shape. So they then created an exclusivities through to interoperability, which everyone is talking about, because I think this is what what we want and what we need, is that we have one style and it works on the sandbox, it works for the central land. Maybe you can also have a downloadable version that works in Unreal Engine so that developers can use it for their own projects. And I think that magic, so I can see that maybe there will be enterprises who specialize in that you could make with the specifications of Decentraland and the specifications of another platform and so on.
Great. And on that note, in terms of then collaboration between the industries, how important is this collaboration? You know, for, you know, right now we're speaking to gaming students and future gaming enthusiasts. How important is it that they have the discussion with the fashion industry or with fashion students at the same time? And apart from yourself, are there any other really good examples that you would recommend them to consider or to look at?
Um, yeah, I think like ways of presentation, that is something that now we have new categories and we need new categories of presentations. So a runway show is not necessarily the best of Yaga. So they had a web browser friendly video game that people could play, and they would discover the collections through playing this, which I think was a very successful project. And then you had The Sims, of course, doing a lot of collaborations. So they had these extension packs, and at some point they started doing extension packs with Moschino, with Taskin Goec, a designer from when people kind of paid money to get the CD with those outfits, which I think was very which was fun. It proved people styling their avatars. They have like in their digital um, for the digital world, especially when it's a shared platform, when it's not just played locally, but when you play with other users and when you have friends across different platforms. I think then it's even more relevant.
Cool. I think you broke up a little bit, but I could understand what you're saying. So this point that for fashion industry, actually, maybe it's more fashion industry to also consider more what gaming can provide apart from just the digitalization of garments. But are there any other key trends that you see from a gaming perspective over the next few years that you think would be important?
Um, so I think uh, um, yeah, I think one as a sort of one key to for this game, and you don't want to buy it again for that game, and also that would um, again make you feel like it is a garment that is in your wardrobe and you actually own it. And then I think that and that uh, so then um, you would talk to people, you would connect your wristbands, and then you were also connected on that game. And you could see all players' profiles. So you would see which kind of they own. You would see what kind of clothes they have. Um, and I think that is a very interesting element of connecting those two worlds. How relevant it will be what we wear in games. Because then, if we meet people in physical world and we connect through our like wristbands or through our phones, then we see what they have in what they wear in this sense.
Okay,
So
cool. And in terms then of the audience engagement, right? With digital fashion obviously becoming more prominent, how do you think this will affect the player engagement within the gaming? Like, not all gamers are so fashion forward or care about, hoodies or even have a sense of fashion, let's say from a fashion perspective. But maybe do you see a growing appeal, like as gamers purchase weapons or skins? Could fashion play more of a role within a demand-driven kind of gaming world? Can you hear me, audience? Maybe, I think
We can
there's,
hear you clearly here. I think Mr. Taskin is having a problem with his internet.
I don't know what that lag is, but maybe let's, is there any questions from the audience? Maybe you can write on the group chat at any one point, and I can also get to them. I think Taskin's back with us. Taskin, sorry, I think there's a internet lag with all of us.
Yeah, I think it's just a bit laggy, but could you repeat that last question? I think that's just when it dropped off.
So the question was more about the audience, and let's say gamers per se aren't like your mainstream fashionistas, and so as there is a demand, I mean, there's a parallel demand. You know, fashionistas on the street are very trend sensitive, and they're trying to buy the latest thing, as are gamers within the gaming world. Do you think there's like a cross-sectional, will there be a crossover that right now gamers aren't as they don't care as much as about the latest hoodie from Balenciaga, but they do care about the latest gun or the latest skin that they could purchase? Will there be, do you think, will there be a demand from a gamer side to have the latest, let's say, fashion skin?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of style and personal preferences. I don't think that gamers are not into fashion. So everyone buys clothing, and it's kind of fashion is also not just luxury fashion. Fashion is also like style and subcultures, and even if it's just a community of like young kids who buy like striped shirts and fishnet sleeves at Hot Topic or so, that's also kind of a style and a fashion. So I think it's about understanding then who plays the game, and are these like 17-year-old punkish nerds that want to have this kind of like maybe some like a collaboration with Hot Topic, or is it 40-year-old conservative women who wear Hermes bags? I think that's very unlikely, so I wouldn't really think about collaborating with Hermes at this point. So I think it's just about understanding who plays the game, and then often you have also networks on Discord or so where people chat and where people connect that play the same games. So I think also not just playing the game, but also being active in those communities will help to understand who these people are and what they like. And then I think if you gave them something that's really unexpected, but really resonates with them in terms of their style or something that they would love to have also in the physical, you also have to keep in mind that digital space is where we can do things that we don't dare doing in physical. So it's also understanding that, okay, maybe these are like introverts who would love to wear a very, very eccentric look in this specific style. Maybe we can give it to them so that they can now wear it in the game. And I think like most of us, we would love to wear as like something that we saw on a Met Gala or so, or like we would love to own this specific piece. But then, of course, it's stuff that we maybe cannot afford, and also when would we wear it? We don't have the space to store these things. So in the games, you have a possibility to do all of these things. You can wear your favorite look, and you can be kind of the fantasy of yourself that you have and you cannot express usually. So I think it's about um, getting to know those players and what is their fantasy of themselves, and then giving it to them. And I think then they will also move away from just the assets and the functional parts.
I mean, but that's what fashion is, right? Fashion has always been about creating a fantasy, and even now, where we don't dare to wear half the clothes that we photograph ourselves on social media on the street, but we do so in this platform called, our bedrooms or our homes, where we're happy to do a photo shoot, but then it's to the degree of let's say confidence. But when we go outside, we'd rather wear a black hoodie, but deep inside, we'd rather wear a pink, I don't know, outrageous look, but we can't. Saying that, and moving on to the next point then about education, where do you see the gaps in what's being taught or what's needed from both sides? So from a gaming side, what could young designers and young game developers consider, or where do you see that they could put some focus or emphasis on, as well as from the fashion side?
So I think from the fashion side, I think designers should learn more about the real-time friendliness of garments. So it's the rigging, the weight painting, it's how drape, like if you have a t-shirt and a tight pair of trousers, that'll rig easily. So that's real-time friendly. But if you have a draped dress and you have um, a lot of volume, you have a lot of volume, let's say under your arm, where does that fabric go? So it's designing specifically for um, for avatars, and then also learning on how to weight paint it properly. I think that's also why there isn't a lot of crossovers between digital fashion and games right now, is because digital designers they haven't done the stuff yet. They work with Close 3D, they create a look, they can pre-render like a walking animation or so, because that is not real time, that is all simulation, which is really big files and it's very, very slow. Um, and then for gaming, I think um, game developers could look less into costume, because I think a lot of the skins are in a way are costume, and are often self-referential. You have like very reoccurring themes like sci-fi themes like cyberpunk. You have these more like medieval themes, um, and so I think also looking a bit more at actual clothing and how clothing is made, maybe as a kind of fun side project to cut up old clothes to see how they are made and how they are assembled, just so you can incorporate all of these um, sartorial or clothing references, like how color is made, so that you can incorporate that into a design.
Great. So in that respect, I mean, and especially given today's audience from India, India produces some of the world's most amazing crafts, couture crafts at that. I mean, I think students have a great opportunity to really spend some time studying what's readily available. You don't have to necessarily look at Western fashion, right, as a source of inspiration. I mean, just look where you come from, right? Wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And then when I've spent like a little bit of time in India, and there were so many uh, like tailors and shops that actually made clothes. So maybe it's even about like going and like asking if you could like see a little bit of the process or so. Just I think remembering how clothing is made, um, and then transferring that onto the digital clothing. I think that is a great way of doing so. And yeah, definitely also not just looking um, at Western styles or things that you already see in the digital, but maybe that's also because then you have like a huge new like market, which is like um, in Southeast Asia, in India, like bringing all of that into the space, then people identify with it. So that's also something like that. That's a great point of saying like this is maybe that's what's needed.
So more reference to, and I think that could also be a great source of inspiration. I mean, from the Western perspective, we don't know how to drape a sari as Indians would. So how important is and how similar is that process of making clothes or draping clothes in the physical world to the process in the digital world? Is there commonality? Do you follow the same steps?
I think there are two ways to approach it. One is where you imitate the process. So you look at how something is draped or knotted, and then you go into Marvelous Designer and you do the same thing. And it can be very, very difficult. So just knotting two ties together in Marvelous Designer, I think that is much more complicated than doing it with your hands and a piece of fabric. And what I see a lot of game developers do, or like people who create for for the metaverse, is they will not do this. They will not drape. They will actually just look at a picture and see the outlines, and then they will basically sculpt, for example, on an avatar, or they will paint. They work a lot with opacity maps so that there's not an actual you don't do an actual class simulation, but you just work with the transparency so that some bits are invisible and other bits are visible. And that's where the real-time friendliness comes in, because you don't have to simulate a lot. It's just maybe it's the texture working with very good like normal and bump maps to create the illusion of depth. So then again, there's this the question of what are you designing for? If it should run really smooth on a web browser video game with like very low hardware requirements, then I would say invest a lot of time into making those beautiful textures, and don't don't waste computing power on draping the snot, but maybe draw it a few times to understand how the knot looks, and then working with Adobe Substance or so to create that, and to work with illusions, basically illusions that are based on texture maps.
That wasn't me, don't worry. Awesome. And then in terms of, I guess the last area I kind of want to discuss with you, the technological challenges. I know you've spoken quite a bit already, but where do you see some additional gaps in where and how the tech can go forward? And certainly if you're an aspiring gamer wanting to enter the fashion world, outside of the fashion technology, are there any other technological gaps that you foresee or that you can identify with?
So I think the biggest lack that we have right now is that still think like beautiful things take a lot of computing power. So a lot of the class simulations also won't look good on a phone, or on games that are developed for phones, or on AR filters. I work a lot with with filters for Instagram, for example, or Lens Studio for Snapchat, um, and they don't look very convincing. And I think that's in a way we need to be patient for the technology to just become a bit better, and for our hardware to become and then one issue also that workflows often fail. So a lot of you notice that if you import something from one software to another, it looks different. If I work with Death 3D and I want to import the same scene into Blender, suddenly everything is messed up and the rig doesn't work anymore. So I think a lot of issues that we have are very, very like boring technical issues. And then we have to spend hours and hours to find the right important so I would you can work you find a way to export from 3D to Blender or whatever software. Actually, very, very valuable work you've done is to solve those issues. And I spend also a lot of time on forums to see what other people are and how other things also be to use those things and ChatGPT to ask ChatGPT for help in these things. Because this is where you will lose a lot of time, or where you can also make your work more efficient. Because right now, everyone has different standards. We don't have one format, one standard format for three objects. There's OBJ, there's FBX, there's GLB and GLTF, and they all do different things. Um, and yeah, it's not very convenient so far.
Perfect. We have a question already in the chat. It's about, I think it's you, Draper. I don't know if you can see the chat question from Deborah. I think
Yeah, I've seen it. I've never worked with you, Draper. Can someone tell me a bit about it? I'm curious.
Maybe Deborah, you want to shed some light on you, Draper, in the chat so that we can read it there. As I said earlier, I would encourage if there's any questions, specific questions, please put them in the chat so we can refer to them. Taskin, I think maybe one of my final questions now before we open up the Q&A. If you had to look back on your process and if you had to kind of give yourself feedback and critique, certainly when you were thinking about entering this world, what would you tell yourself in essence?
I've done, yeah, I experimented a lot, and with experimenting, you go in all different directions, and sometimes you don't document it well. So I think one thing I kind of regret a little bit is not documenting my steps properly. And documenting can be also very low effort. Documenting can also mean that you just do a screenshot every few steps and just screenshotting like your export settings before you export it, because 9%, like 9 times it goes wrong, and then the 10th time it goes right, and you don't know anymore which settings you changed, and then next week you have to go through the same thing again. So in order to work more creatively and spend more time doing the fun stuff, I'd say like I would, in retrospect, have documented the technical path a little bit better. And I've learned a lot of tools that I don't need it eventually, because I thought that if I want to use Blender, I need to know all the different things that Blender can do, which is not right. You can focus on the bits that you can do, that you need to do. So I never needed like sculpting experience. Just wasn't relevant for what I do. So um, don't waste time learning all of the different bits that a software offers, because it caters to very different people with different needs. And rather than just learning a tool from A to Z, I would say think about what you want to do, what's the outcome, and what do you need to execute that well. And um, and also I try to solve a lot of things by myself, which other people have already solved. So I think also in retrospect, I would say just ask more questions on forums, and also answer a lot of other people's questions, so that it goes into both directions. Because if you have this community with other people where you support each other with technical issues, then you can all focus more on developing what you want to do and what is your unique project. Because if you can solve a boring technical import export setting, that's not very interesting for the outside world. So don't waste too much time on that.
Perfect. I meant at the same time, I think we're entering such an exciting space for both worlds that I can see this. I mean, just imagine us alone in the last 2 to 3 years since we got connected, how far you've come and how you will be in the next 3 years. Imagine the future of this space, and certainly universities, schools have to become a lot more open and have to accept that this is an opportunity. And maybe it's not that one will be redundant from the other, it's that there is the actual opportunity. Because let's just reflecting from your class, there was only you that were so engaged in this space, and there is still only you from that class that really embraced this opportunity. So I think the opportunity is there for all to really harness it, to grab it, and to take it forward and to define it. That's the exciting part. There's no rights or wrong in this space right now. So yeah. Okay. Any other parting words before we open it up for discussion, Taskin?
No, that's it from my side. I just need to quickly, I do have a call. um, So, um, and I could come back in like in 10 minutes or so. I'm not sure what's the timeline for this call.
No, I think,
Can you just let me know what?
yeah, I think that's about it. I don't know. Are there any specific questions? I don't see any other questions in the group chat. We can always follow up if students didn't want to or to concern about their English or communicating. We can always follow up with a kind of blog newsletter of the questions coming forward because I don't see any other questions here right now. But on that note, Taskin, thank you so much for your very, very, very valuable time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for inspiring future generation of game designers to explore fashion. And I would encourage everyone, please follow Taskin's Instagram, which is, Taskin?
I'll just put in the chat, and also if you have any question later or at any point, you can just write me a DM. So even if it's not in the context of like a group chat or so, like as I said, one part of the whole community is to help each other with all of the annoying stuff. So yeah, don't hesitate to just write me a message anytime.
Perfect. All right, Taskin, we'll let you go and then I'll wrap up with the rest of the attendees.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And I hope that everyone could take maybe something interesting out of it, and hope that it was helpful and inspiring.
Perfect. Thank you, Taskin.
Thank you,
Thank
Taskin.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
So on that note, I would like to thank you all and also encourage you to take up Taskin's offer. So feel free to write to him, connect with him on Instagram, continue having this discussion amongst yourselves, use what's readily available around you. So don't let a project brief stop you, like really let your imagination go wild. This is one of the big things when I was working with Taskin as a student. You know, he wasn't sure whether playing in this space was acceptable or not, and I think it is, and I think it's very important as young creatives that you do push the boundaries, you do challenge the status quo, and you have those discussions with, you know, not only fashion designers but shoe designers and jewelry designers, and express yourself, because that will really be the future. Is there anything else, any immediate questions to be asked?
Not
No?
specifically towards gaming, but a couple of things like
Yep.
what kind of AI platforms for fashion, at least, which is there, because that's like bridging the gap a little bit right now.
Yeah, I think briefly what I mean, it's this Taskin was saying when I met, we spoke, some of the basic AI platforms like ChatGPT and the visual automation AI solutions coming out of it are a good starting point. I would caution you though, a lot of the gaming world from what I hear is becoming very strict, that you have to be careful what level of inspiration that you take from AI. So people have been caught out when you take the full inspiration and you prompt, you know, a Bard or a ChatGPT to generate an image of X player. You have to be very careful. I think it's okay to ask for
Reference material or help.
yeah, I think it's okay to ask for help. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's a tool. And I think, you know, for example, myself, I'm, you know, I would never say that I'm a great drawer and I'm not the best in composition, but why wouldn't you ask ChatGPT to do a composition of a character on a horse turning left or right? And, you know, then you have to kind of study that, but don't take that as your absolute direct reference. I think use it as a tool. It's a phenomenal tool. I would encourage you to do so, but don't copy it straight off. Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure of how far this is. I'm taking it away from gaming a little bit. Like clothing simulations for movies, like unrealistic, like if you see Hotel Transylvania, which is a completely stylized movie.
Sorry, you broke up there. Yeah, and the question is?
Like a movie like Hotel Transylvania, where the animation style is completely stylized, and the clothing which reacts to it. The simulation for it is there, but how far does fashion take place, take a role in that? Because Taskin was speaking about skin rigging and skinning and on the front of how much you can push your boundaries.
Yep. Yep. I meant, yeah, I mean, from a simulation standpoint, when you are creating, clothing for animation, I mean, what are your reference points? I think most people will look at current media or current, fashion as a trend to say, okay, people wear jeans, so let's simulate jeans in animation or in right. I think there is, it's true what Taskin says is that what gaming is ahead for sure of what could be. Like the potential is exponential. However, when animation has to follow, and in this case, when you have to create clothing for an animation that speaks to a current audience, you are restricted because your viewer are people living in today's era. So you can't be too sci-fi and you can't reinvent the jeans. The jeans is the jeans, it's got, pockets on the front and the back, and you have to follow what people are accustomed to seeing, right? So can you revolutionize that, and can you challenge how jeans are being seen? I guess you could, but before you revolutionize what we understand, I think you need to understand what is currently available, right? So understanding how a pant is made or how a shirt is made or how, jeans as a texture looks, that's step number one, right? Step number two is when you've mastered step number one, then you can challenge the formality of the usage or the form or the function of the jeans. Does that answer your question?
More or less, it's taking me down the road of a real world training, have a hands-on real world training, and then probably understand how to roadmap your way.
Yeah, correct. And with that, once you start, understanding the basis principle in the real world and bringing that to your digital world, you can go back to the real world and say, actually, like weaving, there's a certain weft and warp. Weaving is weaving. You can only weave in a certain way, but understanding the basic principle of weaving and digitalizing weaving, but then experimenting with what can take place, and then maybe even getting AI to create simulations of alternative weavings or learning, basic weaving technology patterns. Then what you start getting is the newness that can then feed back into the traditional world. Does that make sense? So I think one doesn't exist without the other. It's a discussion between both that takes place.
Thank you so much for nothing else.
Awesome. Okay, then. So once again, thank you so much for this aspiring opportunity, and thank you all for coming today. It was an absolute pleasure, and I really do hope that we continue this discussion, and God willing, we can really challenge and revolutionize what is out there, and certainly see that you guys have a great opportunity in a very emerging market. So once again, thank you so much, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Yeah.